Every morning, millions of people perform a ritual. A few drops, a thin layer, a final step before stepping into the world. Yet, hidden beneath those elegant bottles and minimalistic labels lies one of the most misunderstood signs in modern skincare: SPF 50, PA 444. Broad spectrum, water resistance, non comedogenic. Terms printed in golden lettering across luxury counters from Paris to Seoul. But where did these labels come from? Who created them? Why do some countries require them while others don't? And perhaps more importantly, what are they actually measuring? Because despite what marketing often suggests, not all sunscreen protection is created equally. This is the story of how scientists learned to measure sunlight itself and how a simple sunscreen label became one of the most important public health tools of the modern age. Before understanding the sunscreen, we must understand the enemy, not the sun itself, but a tiny fraction of its energy: ultraviolet radiation. Less than 10% of sunlight reaches Earth consists of ultraviolet rays. Yet, this small portion is responsible for majority of the visible sun damage and many forms of skin cancer. Scientists divide UV radiations into three categories. UVC, the most energetic and dangerous. Fortunately, Earth's atmosphere absorbs almost all of it, leaving two primary forms that reach our skin every day: UVB, the shorter wavelength, the burning ray, the one responsible for sunburn, direct DNA mutation, and many skin cancers. UVB strikes mostly the outer layer of skin. Its effects are immediate, they're visible and quite painful. UVA, the longer wavelength, the aging ray, and arguably the most deceptive one. Unlike UVB, UVA penetrates deep into the dermis, the layer containing collagen, elastin, structural proteins that keep skin firm. Over years, UVA slowly dismantles this architecture. The result isn't a burn, it's something far more subtle: wrinkles, sagging, pigmentation, loss of elasticity. In dermatology, this process is known as photoaging. Studies estimate that up to 80 to 90% of visible facial aging is caused not by chronological age but by cumulative UV exposure. The irony: the majority of the damage occurs long before we can see it. The modern sunscreen industry owes much of its existence to a Swiss chemist named Franz Greta. In 1938, after suffering severe sunburn while climbing Mount Pittsburn in the Alps, Greta became obsessed with finding a better way to protect skin from sunlight. A detailed video on the scene is available on a channel for which the link is available in the description. But by the 1950s and 1960s, another challenge emerged. Scientists could formulate sunscreens, but there was no visible method to measure them. How could consumers know whether one sunscreen protected better than the another? The answer arrived in 1962. Greta proposed a standardized measurement: sun protection factor, or SPF. For the first time in the history, UV protection became quantifiable. A scientific language had been created. One of the greatest misconceptions in skincare is that SPF measures total protection. It doesn't. SPF measures only one thing: protection against UVB induced redness. Nothing more, nothing less. In clinical testing, volunteers have sunscreen applied at a standardized amount: 2 milligrams per square centimeter of skin. Researchers then expose skin to carefully control UVB radiations. The amount of UV needed to create visible redness is compared between protected and unprotected skin. The resulting ratio becomes the SPF number. For example, if protected skin tolerates 50 times more UVB exposure before reddening, the sunscreen receives SPF 50. What SPF does not directly measure is UVA protection, anti-aging protection, pigmentation protection, or long-term collagen preservation. And this limitation would eventually create a major problem. Luxury beauty marketing loves large numbers. SPF 100 sounds twice as powerful as SPF 50, but science tells a different story. SPF 15 blocks approximately 93% of your UVB rays. SPF 30 blocks approximately 97%. SPF 50 blocks approximately 98% and SPF 100 blocks approximately 99% of it. The protection curve becomes flattening dramatically. This means SPF 100 is not as twice as protective as SPF 50. In reality, the difference is remarkably small. The larger issue isn't choosing SPF 50 versus SPF 100. It's about applying enough sunscreen. The research repeatedly shows that most of the people allow only 25 to 50% of amount used during laboratory testing, which means their real world protection may be dramatically lower than the number printed on the bottle. Why was SPF never enough? By the late 20th century, dermatologists noticed a paradox. People using higher SPF sunscreen than ever before, yet photoaging remained common. Patients were burning, but were still developing hyperpigmentation, wrinkles, uneven skin tone. Scientists soon identified the culprit. That was the UVA. SPF was never designed to measure it. The industry needed an entirely new system. The story of PA ratings begins not in Europe or America, but in Japan. During the 1980s and 1990s, Japanese researchers became increasingly concerned with about UVA-induced pigmentation, particularly among Asian populations where pigmentation disorders and melasma represented major skincare concerns. Researchers developed a testing system known as PPD, persistent pigment darkening. Instead of measuring redness, scientists measure skin darkening after UVA exposure. The stronger protection against pigmentation, higher the score. The Japanese Cosmetic Industry Association transformed these scientific measurements into a consumer friendly system, and thus PA rating was born. Unlike SPF, which measures UVB protection, PA measures UVA protection. Specific protection against UVA induced pigmentation and long term photoaging. So, PA plus is moderate UVA protection, PA plus plus is good UVA protection, PA triple plus very high UVA protection, PA 4 plus extremely high UVA protection. Today, PA 4 plus has been the gold standard across many Asian beauty markets, specifically Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Singapore, and in India, it's also increasing very commonly. For consumers concerned about melasma, hyperpigmentation, uneven skin tone, and premature aging, PA rating is often more informative than SPF alone. One fascinating aspect of sunscreen science is that regulators vary dramatically around the world. United States, governed by the US FDA, SPF labeling is mandatory. PA labeling is generally not required. Instead, product may carry broad spectrum if sufficient UVA protection is demonstrated. In European Union requires UVA protection to equal at least one third of labeled SPF. Products often display the famous UVA circle logo. In Japan and South Korea, SPF and PA ratings are both standard. Consumers expect to see both values. In Australia, one of the strictest sunscreen markets in the world due to extreme high UV exposures, products undergo rigorous testing before reaching the consumers. As scientific understanding evolved, regulators recognize that consumers need protection from both UVA and UVB. This gave rise to one of the most important labels in the modern skincare, that is, broad spectrum. Broad spectrum sunscreens must demonstrate meaningful protection across a wide UV range. Think of this as a dual defense system. SPF tells you how you'll get protected from the burning. Broad spectrum tells you also protected from the visible aging process happening beneath the surface. Now, other labels, water resistant, perhaps one of the most misunderstood claims. No sunscreen itself is waterproof. In fact, regulators in many countries prohibit the word waterproof. Instead, products may be tested for 40 minutes water resistance or 80 minutes water resistance. Beyond that period, reapplication becomes essential. Non-comedogenic, this label suggests a formulation is less likely to clog pores. However, there is no global standardization testing method for this. What is non-comedogenic for one individual may trigger breakouts in another. Think of it as a guidance, not a guarantee. Fragrance free. No added fragrance ingredients. Particularly beneficial for people with sensitive skin, rosacea prone skin, or compromised skin barriers. Dermatology tested, an often misunderstood phrase. It simply means dermatologists participated in testing. It does not necessarily indicate any endorsement or any superiority. For decades, consumers have chased the bigger SPF numbers on the shelf. Yet, modern sunscreen science tells you a more nuanced story. SPF protects against burning, PA protects against pigmentation and photoaging. Broad spectrum protection ensures coverage against both. And the labels like water resistance and non comedogenic provide additional clues, but only when properly understood. Because luxury skincare isn't about buying the most expensive sunscreen, it's about understanding the science behind it. And once you have learned to read these labels correctly, you stop shopping based on marketing and start choosing based on evidence. The most sophisticated sunscreen isn't the one with the highest number, isn't the one whose labels you finally understand. So, next time you pick up a sunscreen bottle, just don't look at the SPF. Look at the entire protection story. Subscribe for more deep dives into science, history, and hidden truths behind Century's most iconic products.